so thankful for our family.
Amen.
This family of God, and in particular this family here, Bonner Nance. I'm blessed beyond measure. We have this privilege of working and serving together. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your lives, and be a part of this family of God right here. I invite your attention this morning, if you would, open your Bibles to Mark's Gospel. Mark's Gospel, as you look in the New Testament, and you find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, the very first chapter, and we're going to pick up about verse 21. Beginning verse 21, Mark's Gospel, chapter 1. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. And just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." And the impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority? He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him." And news about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. May God add his blessing in our midst to his word this morning. Shall we recite our motto once again together? I really, when I say this over and over, I know you hear me say it now quite a bit, but I don't want it to become so routine that we lose the meaning of the words that we say in our motto. But let's say it from our heart, and let's try to practice this in every day, not just here on Sunday. You ready? Together? Heavenly Father, I give you permission to speak to me, to speak through me, to do whatever you want with my life. I trust the leadership of your Holy Spirit. Amen? Amen. Well, today we're going to talk about casting out demons, or as Mark calls them in today's lesson, impure spirits. It's not a subject that we talk about very much in church anymore, even though it figures very prominently throughout the New Testament. In fact, maybe at the end of today's service I'll perform an exorcism. Cast out a demon. Or not. Perhaps you have someone in mind that you think could profit from such an exorcism. I see you thinking now. So enough said about our Congress member. You don't need to. I didn't just say that, did I? Forgive me. Some of you will remember a movie that caused quite a stir back in the 70s, entitled The Exorcist. The movie was set in Georgetown University. The Exorcist was actually written by a Georgetown alumnus named William Peter Blatty. And it was based on events that were reportedly true. The story of a child brought to Georgetown because of its reputation as a medical center and because of the community of priests who lived on campus. The child was a boy brought to the university because it was believed that this little boy suffered from demonic possession. Now, in the movie, you remember, is a 12-year-old girl who is demon-possessed. And we know she's possessed by these impure spirits because she displays such strange and aggressive behaviors after playing with a Ouija board. And she's constantly swearing, and she displays abnormal strength, which we learn are early symptoms of demonic possession. The movie details this girl's mother's desperate attempts to win back her child through an exorcism conducted by two of the priests from Georgetown University. And the results are horrific. So if any of you haven't seen the movie, before you run home and download it for family viewing, let me just be quick to say that several years ago, The Exorcist was named by both Entertainment Weekly and Movies.com as the scariest film of all time. It is. But back to the scripture. In today's lesson, this scene that we have here in Mark's Gospel is far less dramatic than that portrayed in that movie. We see Jesus and his disciples are in Capernaum. It's the Sabbath. Jesus is teaching in the synagogue. The people are absolutely amazed at his teaching, Mark tells us here in verse 22, because he taught as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. And this is why people flocked to hear him, because they knew that when he spoke, he would say something important. That what he said was important. They knew that. Christ had barely begun his teaching this particular day in the synagogue. However, when a man in the synagogue began to cry out, and the interesting thing is, as we read here, he spoke in the third person plural. Look at verse 24 of this first chapter. He said, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" And then he reverts back to the first person singular when he says, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." So Mark explains to us that this man who was crying out was possessed by a demon, possessed by an impure spirit. Now we don't know if this means that the man was mentally deranged, but we might guess that he probably was. Sadly, such people do exist, of course. And maybe, perhaps, if this sad man were in today's world, he wouldn't just cause a disturbance in church. He might actually pull out an automatic weapon and begin mowing down worshipers. Disturbed people are very unpredictable, though very few of them are violent. Very few. And whatever the nature of this man's affliction is, however, Jesus was very much in control of the situation. Very much in control. Look at verse 25. See what Jesus said? "Be quiet," he said sternly, "and come out of him." And then in verse 26, Mark tells us that the impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. Now this scene, if you're trying to picture it in your mind, it's a bit disturbing, but it doesn't last long enough to make a scene worthy of Hollywood. This man who formerly had an impure spirit is now sitting there, very calm and composed, and listening with all the others to what Jesus is having to teach, what Jesus is having to say. Picture that in your mind. He's listening. Mark 27, or verse 27, Mark says, "The people are also amazed that they ask each other, 'What is this, a new teaching?' He even gives orders to the impure spirits, and they obey him." Can you imagine? I mean, here they are. People began grabbing their smartphones and texting to their friends all over the whole region of Galilee. "Man, you won't believe what happened at church this morning." Can you picture it? It's happening. Of course, they didn't communicate their excitement exactly like that, of course. But wouldn't it be wonderful if when something exciting did happen in worship that we would tell our friends what is happening? And I really hope that if something in church does excite you, say the music moves you like we had this morning, or the children perhaps do something enjoyable in the worship service, or whatever it might be, that you will say something about it to your friends on Facebook, Or on Twitter. In fact, I've noticed some people on Facebook, when they come to church, they put on, when you check in, they have, was that honor streams enjoyed worship this morning? I like to see that. That's cool. That's good. Tell people about it. Spread the word. Share your joy with others. Of course, the only social media people in the first century Galilee had was what they call person to person. That's what they had, person to person. But Mark tells us that the word spread all over the whole region. That here's a man who teaches with authority, and he has power over the demons as well. What a resume, wouldn't you say? Well, let's talk a few minutes today about demons or impure spirits. And I want to ask you a question. And I want us to be honest with ourselves. It's just us, we're family, right? Is there an impure spirit troubling you today? Is there an impure spirit troubling you? Now let me be careful to caution you that not all impure spirits are supernatural powers that inhabit people's minds. Not all of them are supernatural powers that inhabit people's minds and causes them to foam at the mouth and tear at their clothes. Not all of them are like that. There are some perfectly normal people who have some deep and deadly emotional issues. And you could be sitting here today just placidly listening to this message, and you're having thoughts perhaps of suicide or even violence toward another person. Or you might be suffering from some deep depression in your life. Or you might know someone who is. There's no disgrace, my friend. There's no disgrace to talk with a professional about your problems. Don't be embarrassed. Not at all. Mental problems are no different than physical problems. You know, if you were sitting here this morning and all of a sudden you had a sharp pain in your side and it just wouldn't go away and it's so annoying and just hurt, so painful, I bet you'd be calling a doctor this afternoon, wouldn't you? Like Ron did a few weeks ago. Ellis he felt very uncomfortable and went to the emergency room Sunday afternoon a few weeks ago. That's when he found out he had the shingles.
Went into the roofing business.
He found out he started a roofing business. Yeah. Oh, man. You see, you just wouldn't hesitate to deal with those kind of things. And so we shouldn't feel that way about our emotional and mental thoughts as well. If you can't pull yourself out of a deep depression, get help. Or urgently urge someone you love to get help. Because some of the finest people who have ever lived had times in their lives when they were tormented by those kind of demons. So don't suffer any longer if you're in that situation. There are all kinds of impure spirits that work quieter, but in equally troubling ways. And I want us to look at some very briefly this morning while we're here. Number one, for example, many of us are controlled by our fears. Many of us are controlled by our fears. Fear is a demon that cripples many fine people. That's one reason that many people are carrying guns today. Did you know that? It's because of fear. In fact, a reporter interviewed a cross-section of people very recently with licenses to carry firearms, and that's what he found in his interviews and reports. That many people feel the need to protect themselves and their families from unknown threats. So they're buying guns. And that's in spite of the fact that many of us have never known anybody who was the victim of a violent crime or a violent attack. Just from watching TV, we would think that there's danger everywhere. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be careful. But fear is a terrible thing. For some, it's the fear of being attacked. The fear of being attacked is a big fear. For others, it can be as seemingly benign as the fear of being rejected or being laughed at. The fear of being rejected or being laughed at. Some people are even haunted by the fear that somehow they just do not belong, or they just don't measure up to other people's standards. In fact, author Steve Chandler compares it to the feeling that some of us had in high school. You remember those feelings in high school? Everyone else was cool but us. You remember that? Back when I was back in high school, I had slick hair. I mean, I put that gel in my hair, and I had the part on one side, very cut. And that was, during the Beatles times. So I wanted that long hair flip around, right? Everybody else was cool with me, that's for sure. But they wanted me to come to their parties because they wanted to laugh at me. That's what they told me. Yeah. Those feelings in high school. Did you ever feel like that? Anybody else feel like that? In fact, Steve Chandler says that many people feel like they've been left stranded in high school forever. Like something happened there that we've never shaken off in high school. He said before high school, in our earlier, more carefree childhood, says Chandler, we were creative dreamers filled with a boundless sense of energy and wonder. But in high school, something got turned around. For the first time in our lives, he said, we began fearing what other people were thinking about us. And all of a sudden, our mission in life became not to be embarrassed. We were afraid to look bad. And so we made the point not to take risks. Wow. We can relate, can't we? But how can you live a happy and productive life if you're constantly afraid of being humiliated? Constantly afraid. In fact, in an interview years ago, David Brinkley asked the advice columnist Ann Landers, so you know it had to be years ago, he asked her what question was she the most frequently received from readers? What was the most frequently received question that she was asked? And the question, she said, that she was most asked was, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? I just have to ask. Maybe we feel like that. Maybe you have that feeling from time to time. That something's wrong with you. That you just don't somehow measure up. That you don't belong where you'd like to belong. That's a demon that's very real today. It's an impure spirit that's very real and alive today. And it holds many, many good people back today. Dr. Thomas Harris wrote a very popular book a number of years ago entitled, I'm Okay, You're Okay. Remember that book? Some of you undoubtedly read that book when it first came out. But among the many important truths in that book is one that we need to be reminded of from time to time. The truth is that we all have scripts, as he calls it in the book, Dr. Harris, scripts that are written and imprinted in our brains. And these scripts even have sound to them. Some of them sound like a parent or a parent figure. And we hear the sounds in our heads telling us all this stuff. And the painful reality is that the loudest scripts that we have to deal with are, I am not okay. I am not okay. Those kind of scripts we hear the loudest. And those are the kind of scripts that diminish and devalue us. We're not worth anything. And we hear words like, and maybe they are words that not only we hear in our head, but they've been pounded into us from people. Like, oh, you always screw things up. You're never going to amount to anything. You don't take care of your things. You're disorganized. You're a failure. All those types of things we hear. And we imprint those words on our brains, and they stay with us all our lives unless we allow Christ to exorcise those demons. We allow Him to exorcise those demons by telling us that we do belong, that we do measure up by His grace. Because He took our place on the cross. We do belong. We are God's child. We are accepted in His family. We belong to Him. Regardless of what your baggage is. Regardless of the baggage. We belong because of the cross. Amen? Fear. Fear. What a terrible demon. Whether it's fear of other people or fear that there's something wrong with us. Fear. And fear is related to another impure spirit that controls many people today. That's number 2, the spirit of anger. The spirit of anger. A lot of people today are filled with free-floating anger, and they're just waiting to explode. Chuck Swindoll, in his book entitled Growing Strong in the Seasons of Life, he uses an example of a camel. He uses the example of a camel, and he says that camels may build up a pressure cooker of resentment toward their owners. And that finally, he says, that resentment will explode and the camel goes berserk. That in Asia, when a camel driver senses trouble, he'll give his coat to the animal, and the camel takes out its resentment on that garment, jumping on it, biting it, tearing it to pieces. And when the camel feels it has blown its top enough, then man and animal can live together in harmony again and go on as peaceful. Yeah. Don't you wish that worked with human beings? Yeah, many wives would be thrilled to give their husband one of their garments for him to take out his resentment on, I'm sure. Some husbands also feel that way about their wives, I'm sure. In fact, a recent survey on marital violence reports that approximately 1 in every 7 American couples has used some form of physical abuse during an argument in the past year. 1 in 7 couples in the past year. Anger is certainly an impure spirit. Anger. Jim Taylor, in the Currents magazine, tells about his good friend Ralph Milton. He said one morning Ralph was awakened to a noise that sounded like someone repairing boilers up on his roof. And it woke him up. He looked at his clock. This was on a Saturday morning. He looked at his clock. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. His day to sleep in. Man, was he upset. Still in his pajamas, he said he went out and looked in the backyard to investigate, and you know what he found? A woodpecker on his TV antenna, pounding its little brains out on that metal pole. And angry at that little creature who ruined his sleep, Ralph picked up a rock and threw it at the bird. Well, you know what happened. The rock sailed over the house, and he heard a distant crash as it hit his own car, knocked out his window. In utter disgust, Ralph took a vicious kick at a clod of dirt, only to remember too late that he was still barefoot. And the woodpecker was still pounding away. But now Ralph had a broken car window and a sore foot. A lot of good that did. Anger does so much damage to ourselves and others. Angry, cynical people die young. Angry, cynical people die young. Men, in fact, who score high for hostility on standard tests are 4 times more likely to die prematurely than men whose scores are low on those tests. Anxiety and anger are certainly impure spirits. But the number of impure spirits in the world are certainly many, 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 many. But number 3, the most deadly of all these spirits is the spirit that tells us that we are unnoticed and unloved. The spirit that tells us we are unnoticed and unloved. In fact, you probably remember on December the 14th in 2012, a couple of years ago, you remember 20 children and 6 adults were killed at the Sandy Hook Elementary School by 20-year-old Adam Lanza, who had earlier killed his mother, Nancy Lanza, in their home. And they said that as the police approached the school, Lanza took his own life. It's the second deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. But the police report reveals that Adam Lanza possessed a list of 500 of the world's most notorious mass murderers, and that he was trying to rack up the greatest number of kills in history. Could we agree that Adam Lanza was possessed by an impure spirit? It was a spirit that told him his life didn't matter, that he was unnoticed and unloved. And the only way to rectify his situation was to rack up a world record. Then people would notice. You see, it's a terrible thing when you are young to feel unnoticed and unwanted. It's a terrible thing when you're young. It's a terrible thing at any time, but especially when you're young. And of course, Adam Lanza's feelings and his way of acting them out were very extreme. Because most people with such feelings are no harm to anyone, but they still live a miserable experience. They still live a miserable experience. In fact, psychologist Dr. D. Ross Campbell studied young people attracted to religious cults back in the 60s and 70s. How many of you remember those days? Me? There you go. You remember that? Maybe you find yourself in that picture. But he said that those cults were quite adept at exploiting the feelings of being unnoticed and unloved. And he described how one group that was particularly successful in those days, the so-called Moonies. You remember them? The Moonies. And he talked about how they went about this exploitation. And he told of an emotionally charged session in which several Moonies surrounded a young man. And this young man was required to think back into his childhood and remember painful moments. And so the young man told of an incident that when he was 3 years old, that he remembered feeling lonely and distressed. And he tried to seek comfort and physical contact from his mother. But his mother didn't have time for him at that moment, and so he felt rejected. Then the Moonies embraced him repeatedly, giving him the physical contact that he longed for. And they also stated repeatedly that they loved him, implying, of course, that his mother did not. They did. And that's why he turned his back on his family. Let me just ask you this morning, who among us has not harbored this kind of feeling at some time in our lives? That I'm nobody. Nobody notices me. No one appreciates me. No one. Is that the impure spirit that's troubling you today? Do you feel unnoticed and unloved? Is there that kind of an impure spirit that you're struggling with, that you're dealing with today? And if there is one impure spirit that the gospel of Jesus Christ should dispel, it is this one, that you're unwanted and unnoticed. Because let me just remind you this morning, you are loved, very deeply loved by the God of all love and comfort. In fact, Jesus said it so beautifully in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12 and verse 6, when Jesus said, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." Wow. That's how much God cares about you, that every hair on your head is numbered. When you comb your hair in the morning, you know there's another hair. God knows what number that was. I know I joked a while ago about performing an exorcism at the end of this service. But of course, only Christ can cast out impure spirits. Only Christ can do that. And you know what? He can do that by filling us so full of the love of God that there's no room for any other spirit to torture us. He can fill you so full of the love of God that nothing else would matter. Nothing else can torture. So this morning, are you afraid? Are you angry? Are you feeling unnoticed? Unloved? Let me invite you this morning to open your heart to God and let God create a new heart and a right spirit within you, to take out the impure spirit and put a spirit of love and gratitude and appreciation in you, in your heart. He wants to do that. He not only is able to do that, He wants to do that. Do you believe that this morning? Amen. You know, today is the first Sunday of the month, and it's our time for sharing communion together. And I asked Carrie if she would play the song, and some of you may know the song, some of you may not, but it's a song entitled "Fill Me Now." Jesus, come and fill me now. Fill me with your hallowed presence. Jesus, come and fill me now. And I know we don't do it very often. Not too long ago we did. But I want to give an opportunity for you this morning. Perhaps there's something. Maybe it's an impure spirit. Maybe it's some other thoughts that's creeping into your mind. You just need help this morning. You need the Lord's help to purify your thoughts, and to purify your heart. And at this time of communion, I would just invite you to come to the altar, and we'll serve you communion while you're here at the altar. To use this time to come before the table of God and asking Him to fill us so that there can be no impure thought. Create a new heart. Create a right spirit within me. And take away any impure spirit, any impure thought we may have. So while Carrie is playing and our servers are coming to help me, I would invite you to just take this moment and come to the altar to be able to share and leave your burden here on the Lord and ask Him to fill you.